Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to offer dana, then please do go to justthiszen.org/giving. Your support really does make a huge difference. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Been really looking forward to giving this talk. It feels like such a privilege. I'm so aware of my teachers, all the many teachers that I've had, one I get the luck to live with. But the talk feels like something about threads, something about connections, something about ancestors, that feels like, if any of you have had the opportunity to give a talk, you'll know that the preparation does something, just like preparing something starts kind of living inside you in a different sort of way. So for me, this has been, a really intriguing and interesting internal journey. And I'm hoping it has some interest for you. I've certainly enjoyed it. I'm not sure that's a criteria, but never mind. We started with the very first sort of koan that Josh was talking about, where the world-honoured one ascends the seat, and Manjushri says, "Here he is, how amazing," and the world-honoured one gets down and goes, which is a whole really interesting thing about how do we express the Dharma. What does that mean to be embodied? What does it mean to live in the body as an expression of the Dharma? So that was the kind of point that we started at. And the verse has also been really echoing, the unique breeze of reality. Can you see it? The unique breeze of reality. Can you hear it? Today it sounds like rain. Continuously creation runs her loom and shuttle, weaving the ancient brocade, incorporating the forms of spring. As the woof goes through the warp, the weave is dense and fine. One continuous thread comes from the shuttle. How can it be even spoken of on the same day as false cause and no cause? This amazing thread that we share just by being here. And yesterday in Dokusan, I had the chance to sit with people who are part of my brocade. And there was just something so beautiful about that recognition of the way that we have woven in and out of each other's lives. Whether that's a short amount of time or a long amount of time, it's still there in the weave. Sometimes it's imperceptible and sometimes it's a really big part of the pattern. But there's something about that recognition of constant connection. And a little while ago, I saw a short video courtesy of TV2 Denmark, who make nice things. If you want to watch nice things, watch some things from Denmark. And in the video, they had assembled in a just like a hangar type room, a group of people who had been appeared to be randomly invited. And then the kind of facilitator called up one person and said, come and stand in front of the group. And she called up another person and she said, this is Hans, and he used to live at, and gave the name of the street and the house where the first person lived at. And these two people had lived in the same house over different periods of time. and they talked about playing football and the delight of the house. So it was a very sweet little meeting. And then the first person left and the second person comes in. And this person has this connection to the man who lives in the house. And it was like watching this sort of human braid. Each person that came forward had a connection with the previous person, which they did not know about. So one of them was the midwife for a woman now in her 30s. One of them was a fireman who'd saved a woman's house. Another was a man who'd resuscitated this woman's husband by the side of the road. So some of the meetings were just, joyful, sad, profound, amazing. And there was something about that unknown connection and yet always there that really struck me about how our practice is in opening ourselves to these connections we didn't even know we had, which is to the world. It's to the entire world, of which we are, of course, a part. So each person has their own sort of unique breeze. And as Josh said yesterday, being who I am, I found the intriguing idea of ancient brocade just too good an opportunity to miss. So I went online and these pieces are old brocade, so they're reused vintage brocade from the obis, which are the big belts that go round kimonos. So there's one here, there's one on the memorial altar, and there's one in the Dokusan room. And they're unusual because obis are usually quite narrow and they're one-sided. So this particular one is from a manufacturer who did it on both sides. So normally I never buy obi fabric because it's too narrow for the altar, but these little pieces turned up as if by magic. So that was a very lovely thing to sort of find that. And then because I was doing the rabbit hole of Etsy, I came across, some of you may have no idea about the rabbit hole of Etsy. Some of you may know it well. So as I was doing that, I came across this piece of fabric, and it was an ancient brocade, and I'd written poems about weaving. I'd had a previous boyfriend who had his own loom. In those days, everybody had a loom. So he had a loom. I was really interested in weaving. I'd watched things where people were weaving. So the whole notion of weaving really feels to me like an incredibly personal, visceral experience of the world that I realised in my own life quite a while ago, that you can't unpick the patterns. You can't go back and go, I wish this one thread wasn't there, because the entire brocade is made up of all the threads. And much as we might really like to pull them out, you can't. We can't without destroying the very fabric of our lives. So there was something for me about this real acceptance of, here are all the threads that have woven into my life, and here are all the threads that we weave every day into our lives. And last year, some of you may know that one of our dear Sangha members, Kath, died, and her partner Margaret who lives in I think Somerset. Anyway, she contacted a coffin weaver who supported people to come and weave the coffins of their beloveds. So she spent the day weaving a coffin out of willow picked locally for her beloved partner. And Josh and I officiated at the at the ceremony, and it was a very beautiful thing. And I was struck then about the power of weaving. So I wrote this poem for Margaret. My friend wove a willow coffin for her beloved, strand over strand in the shared silence of a workplace smelling of life and the broad levels where the willow had lived and grown. All the many threads of their vegetable lives lived effortlessly amidst the wind and sun and the sound of passing geese. Woven with the threads of a life, lived with love and connection, disaster and grace. All these now tangled lives will together turn to ash, as all life does, tending as it does always towards the elements that everything is made of. And it was a very profound experience for Margaret to go and weave the coffin, and it was a profound experience for everybody in the room to see love made tangible. There was something so powerful about agreeing to death, not running away from it, but really working with it. And it made me think a lot about time. I think a lot as, maybe it's just the thing that happens as you age, is something becomes really intriguing about time passing and time left. And some of you may know that I really love the work of a Yoruban social philosopher called Bayo Akomalfe, who writes beautifully and curiously. And there's a piece by him that I really like because it felt like it's part of this, how do we weave a life? Your life's work is an intergenerational project. That is because we are produced by the manifold, by the collective, so that to squeeze the significance of one's life into the container of its biological duration is to lose sight of the way that death is generative, prolific, and even useful for continuity. It is to center the human in the very middle of a cosmic saga, all the while forgetting that the human is already ecstatically mediated by and dependent upon and threaded through with the non-human. Our bodies are long bodies, wide bodies, spread out, queering space and time. Your failure, your confusion, might very well be the nourished soil that coaxes out new possibilities from the earth. Our work is long, unusual, and always yet to be fully disclosed. Your life is not yours to resolve, yours to complete, or yours to contain. Your life is not yours to resolve, yours to complete, or yours to contain. It is necessarily the life of the many. Be thankful for the threadbare places in your life, for it gives the many who are yet to come something to stitch theirs with. And there's something about that for me is very releasing about the idea that all the tendrils of failure and incompleteness and everything that I leave are actually the anchors for new life to be woven onto. They're not a problem and they're not a failure. They're just part of the crop of this year. And next year there'll be another one. That idea of being a part of an ongoing continuous thread, weaving in and out of all of human life, not just our human-centric one, really speaks to me as sitting here in this countryside and hearing the birds and seeing the life and finding a way to not make it all about me, even though it is. Feels to me like a really central to practice. One of my other pastimes, apart from Etsy rabbit holes, is watching videos of craftspeople. I always love how people make things. It intrigues me, and at the moment there's a whole slew of stuff on the internet of rural people in, I think, Japan, China, Taiwan, who are demonstrating the traditional ways that things have been made. And it's extraordinary. This guy goes out, he cuts down bamboos just growing outside. He takes it back, he chops it, he makes extraordinarily complex loom. He collects the silk cocoons. He spends ages making the silk. They roll up their trousers and rub the silk to make the thread on their thighs. It's like, it's a physical activity, and it takes forever. So finally he's got this loom, finally he's got the thread, and finally he makes this beautiful long piece of very simple fabric. He's only using one colour. And it looks like he's doing it all himself. And then you look around at his surroundings, and he's using all the artifacts that have been used and left. He's using the river to go and beat the cloth that runs outside. He's using these ancient sort of pots to burn things in. And it's physical. It's really, really physical. It takes hours and hours and hours and days to make this one piece of fabric. And I was intrigued with the idea of Zen coming out of a rural society, an agrarian society, where if you wanted to do something, you had to go and do it yourself. You had to make the ink to write the sutras on. You had to make the paper that you wrote the sutras on. It's a really different way of life where everything is embodied. You don't just wander to the shop and buy it. If you want it, you make it, and you can pretty well guarantee it'll take a lot of time. There's one little clip where I often don't know what they're doing. I have no clue, it's just intriguing. He puts something in a pot and he covers it with some cloth, and he goes and digs it and sticks it in a cave, and then sometime later he comes back and gets it out. I don't know. But months have passed. Months. And I was thinking about patience. And I was thinking about allowing ourselves to be that intergenerational project. That this weaving takes time. It doesn't happen in a day, or one sit, or 1 week, or 2 weeks. It's probably time that we have no clue about. Absolutely no clue about. So when I started pulling on these threads and looking, the piece of fabric that I found on Etsy was a piece of brocade from the 19th century that had been part of a Japanese priest's okesa, which is the robe that the Japanese priests wear. So, not yet. So I got really intrigued by this. A, it was beautiful, but B, it seemed like an extraordinary sort of coincidence to find this ancient piece of fabric that had made up a Japanese priest's okesa, which is the formal robe. This is the rakusu, which is the small piece that we wear, but the okesa is what a priest wears. And I got very caught by it, and I was intrigued. It's from the Meiji period, which is a time when Japan was both out of contact with the West and moved into contact with the West. So it may have been worn by a priest who'd never heard of white people, who would probably fall off his own zafu if he was to think of a group of white people sitting in Devon, listening to a Dharma talk given by a woman. Imagine that. Imagine that. He would have had no clue. And even if it was after 1860 or so, and Japan was forced to open up to the West, most people in villages still would never have seen a Westerner. Would never have seen one. So this thread really appealed to me, this idea of this ancient sort of thread. So it was amazing and precious and a fragment of an unknown life and time, and I really wanted to buy it. But I also knew that an akasa is seen as the body of the Buddha. It is a ceremonial garment, and if it's not in use, you usually burn it. They don't usually carry on their own life outside of the life of the person who wore them, except that as extremely expensive pieces of material and equipment, these old brocade ones may well have been passed on. So I talked with Flint. We spoke with Flint because I was aware, in the meal chat we say you must be aware of your greed. So I thought, I really must be aware of my greed. And wanting it might not be a good enough reason to have it. So I had no idea whether it was kind of caring or disrespectful to buy this. And what we talked about was the opportunity to take care of something. That if Zen is about taking care and ceremony, here is an opportunity to take care of something. So I thought I would really like to take care of this. So this particular fragment isn't in accord with the Zen priest's robes that you will see people like Flint and Blanche and all the people that you see, because they obey the particular rules that are called nyohei, which means paying very particular attention to the form and the colour. This would have been a ceremonial robe worn by a Japanese priest who probably inherited his temple from his father. Priesthood was kind of a job, not necessarily, it was a spirit, like being a member of the clergy. It's a spiritual job, but it was also a job. So this particular one would have been worn, I don't know, births, deaths, marriages, end of the world, famine, because it was tough times. It's tough times there. So this is a piece of fabric that irresistibly called to me. So this is anywhere 150, 200 years old, has been worn, taken care of. You can see the different pieces that it's made up of. So the akasa is sewn together. The story is that the Buddha, somebody was looking for the Buddha and his disciples, somebody important, and he approached a monk to talk to, thinking he was going to talk to the Buddha, and realised he was just an everyday kind of monk, wasn't one he was interested in. So he suggested to the Buddha that he find robes that distinguished him and his disciples from other ones. So they looked at the land, and the land was about the paddy fields. And so the fabric is made up in the pattern, as this is, of the overlapping, intersecting pieces of fabric, which are the paddy fields. So, please have a look, hand it round. Koan Franz says, Nyoho is being in accord with the Dharma. In traditional monastic terms, Nyoho is discussed in terms of colour, materials and size. But he's much more interested. The idea extends into every aspect of our lives and invites the larger question: what does it mean in this moment to express the Dharma? What would it mean to wear the okesa? What does it mean? What informs such a practice? And what are the ingredients of creating an atmosphere of practice for others? I asked the seller how he'd got hold of it, and he'd found it in an antique shop in the south of France 20 years ago. So I wondered if it was from Vietnam, because the Vietnamese had a lot of contact with the French, so I don't know, it could have got there. So our history of the Dharma is 2,000 years old. And here's a little fabric from 150 years old, travelling around the room, threading. When I first got my rakusu, because I hadn't worn one, I took Jukai at the same time as getting entrusted, so I hadn't worn one before entrustment. And the thing that really struck me about putting on the rakusu was how it made sense of the verse of the robe. Vast is the robe of liberation. Vast is the robe of liberation. A formless field of benefaction. Wearing the universal teaching, I realize the one true nature, thus harmonizing all being. And many of us here probably have something of an abreaction to sticking it on your head or seeing it on your head. It can look pretty strange, and I had to get over quite a lot of self-consciousness in doing that, because it felt so weird. But when I allowed myself to feel myself sitting under the robe, sitting enclosed by the robe of liberation, something really shifted in that being an honouring, not a self-consciousness. And Dogen went to China, and he saw how they were wearing the kesa, the okesa, and he vowed to see and listen and wear Buddha's direct teaching. When you're wearing this, you're wearing the teaching. When you're wearing the okesa, you're wearing the teaching. And he vowed that all sentient beings would attain Buddhahood through seeing and wearing the okesa and through listening to the verse of the robe. And after he went back to Japan, he strongly recommended to people to wear the nyoho, and by his earnest vow, many lay people and monks began to wear it. So he brought back from China this idea of embodying on your body the teachings of the Buddha. In the case of Kudoku, Dogen Zenji is saying that the robe covers the entire formless field of benefaction, which is here, which includes everything, and which has the patterns of the earth. So it's not a thing, and it's not an object. It's a teaching. Victoria Austin, who was very important in Flint's Dharma entrustment ceremony and part of the sewing teachers group, said, if someone were to take away my robes, I wouldn't have lost the robe. It is a wonderful teaching. So once we have started to embody the teachings, these things symbolize it, but they aren't it. It's how we are wearing it in our bodies. Kodo Sawaki Roshi said, and when drizzle and dew, mist and clouds cover our bodies, we are calm and unworried. What a great opportunity today we've got for drizzle and dew to cover our bodies and be calm and unworried. By wearing the kesa, we find peace of both mind and body. The kesa is a symbol of the Buddha's law, the garment of drizzle and dew, mist and clouds, because it's about the world. The kesa is not about separating you from the world. It's about embodying being absolutely the whole world yourself, as everyone is. Heaven and earth, the entire universe, are one single Kesa. No world exists outside of the Kesa. We do not fall into hell or rise up to heaven. We go nowhere. We come from nowhere. There is only one Kesa. And as I heard that first case, the well-honored one ascends a seat, he's wearing as his body the robe of liberation, the robe of the field of virtue and the robe of formlessness. Dogen Zenji was very keen on the Akasa, and he said, I could continue talking about the merits of the Akasa forever, and the merit would not be exhausted. In my entire life, I could not fully express it. It is that vast and boundless. Even if you cannot understand that the Akasa is Buddha, just believe it and honestly treat it as such. So you don't even have to believe it, you just have to think, I can treat this with respect. And that's one of the feelings for me in the Zendo, is taking care. Whether we have a clue what we're doing, whether we think we're hopeless, whether we think we're never going to get it, our job is just to attend with great care. And of course there is the interconnected way that the Rakusu and Akasa are. And although we sow the Rakusu, we sowed ours in a virtual environment. So our Zoom sowing took place in different places. If we'd been in a physical Sangha, we would have shared our Rakusus with all the other members of the Sangha for the first year. So I can't tell you how delighted I am to see Catherine wearing Julia's Rakusu today. So that is part of the living tradition, that we share our Rakusus, because we don't sow them for ourselves. We sow them as the body of the Buddha. We sow them for the Sangha. The robe is not a thing, it's a teaching, and it's a teaching that looks like this, and that, and that. There's two little poems about the Kesa which I really love. One says, I am happy in my Kesa. Calmly I possess the universe. I stay or leave as it wishes. The pure breeze drives the white clouds. And then Kodo Sawaki Roshi quoted this one, I think it's anonymous. Wherever it goes, the snail is at home when it dies. There is no home outside the Kesa. If the Okesa is the body of the Buddha, and the well-honored one sat down within his own body, when we sit down, first of all we bow to the Buddha who's going to sit in the chair, and then we bow to all the Buddhas who are already here in the room. That's the unique breeze of reality. That one that swirls around in here. Can you feel it? Can you feel the continuous thread that flows through us all? We can be so rooted in our sense of separateness. It's our most painful delusion that we aren't connected, that we don't have a place, that we aren't part. It is probably the one that most of us struggle with for most of the time. I certainly did. I felt fortunate to stay alive long enough to not think that all the time. It took a long time. So the question is, how do we soften that delusion of separateness? How do we allow ourselves to be the thread, to be part of the thread, to be part of the weave of our own lives and other people's lives? One of my favourite authors, Ursula Le Guin, who wrote a fabulous book called The Wizard of Earthsea, which for me, reading was the first time I entertained the idea of turning towards the darkness. If you've not read the trilogy, it is wonderful. And Jed, the hero in the story, makes a terrible mistake, and he calls up a fragment of darkness, and the darkness pursues him, and he spends a long time running, trying to get away from it. And it's only when he turns and completely, I want to say confronts, but it's more like embraces the fragment of darkness that he's called out, that he becomes whole again. So she was a wise woman, and she wrote, I think that when I die, I can breathe back the breath that made me live. I can give back to the world all that I didn't do and all that I might have been and couldn't be, all the choices I didn't make, all the things I lost and spent and wasted. I can give them back to the world, to the lives that have to be lived yet. That will be my gift back to the world that gave me life. I did live, the love I loved and the breath I breathed, and I can give that back. And for me, that's a kind of real recognition of we're part of this tapestry, we give to it, we take from it, and then at the end we'll leave with things undone, mistakes made, chances not taken. What a great opportunity for other people. Francis Caplow, who was the editor of The Hidden Lamp. So Josh knows this. When we first started studying Zen, I spent a lot of time being grumpy about old Zen men. The lineage looked like it was old Zen men, and it didn't sit well. After time, it didn't sit well for a lot of Western people, and they created a beautiful lineage of women, which hasn't got the same continuity, but it's there now. When you receive your rakusu, you get a piece of the lineage paper which has all the lineage of the women practitioners who've carried forward, and Florence Caplow has been a real driver in honouring the presence and gifts that women have offered into the Zen tradition. And she said, and I love this, and I'm hoping if you take nothing from this talk, please take this. I made a great discovery about ancestors. You can adopt whomever you want as an ancestor. They're not going to turn you down. You don't get to choose your biological parents and grandparents, but when you're adopting ancestors, you get to invite the people you admire, teachers, historical figures, writers and artists who have influenced and encouraged you to be your ancestors. And they're not going to turn you down. I have a difficult history. I decided to cut contact with my biological family. So for me, the whole intriguing thing about ancestors is I have been collecting ancestors I like. Ancestors who can teach me, ancestors who support me. And so I am going to adopt an unknown Japanese priest as my ancestor, and I'm going to sew a new envelope for the rakusu, and I'm going to use pieces of fabric that I have. One is from, I was studied in a Hindu temple 50 years ago, and I've got the piece of silk that I had on my altar then, and we've got beautiful curtains in our living room. And they've been there for a very long time. And I've sat with all my friends and my loved ones and my children in that room. So I'm going to sew a new envelope for that. And I want to honour it and care for it. Dogen, this is called Old Dogen's Prayer. Buddhas and ancestors of old, whereas we. Buddhas and ancestors of old, whereas we in the future shall be Buddhas and ancestors. Those who in past lives were not enlightened will now be enlightened. In this life, save the body, which is the fruit of many lives. Before Buddhas were enlightened, they were the same as we. Enlightened people of today are exactly as those of old. We can all sit down, we can all be the fabric. We can sit on the throne and be the fabric of the Dharma. We can be the fabric that we're made out of, all of the threads, each one of us. And we are the only way that Buddha nature can be expressed exactly in this moment. There is no other way to express the Dharma than being yourself right at this moment. So, I'll end with a poem. I just bought the body of the Buddha from Etsy. What I mean is, in an unrelated search, I saw a piece of a Buddhist priest's robes, a beautiful patchwork of ancient brocade, a fragment of a garment made in the 1800s in faraway Japan, a country that was in the throes of ceding to the demands of the West to open for trade. I cannot know anything. I cannot know anything of the life of this priest, who himself couldn't have imagined as the needle plunged into the then pristine fabric, sewn with each stitch entering the life of the Buddha, as small pieces were assembled to become a sacred whole, that his garment, long after his body wore it, would find its way to the south of France, and then to a collector in England, and then to me. The journey of our lives are made of so many tangled threads, causes and outcomes, far beyond our own capacity to comprehend. I shall gather these threads and sew an envelope for it, made of pieces from my life, an ancient pilgrimage, sewing another piece into the endless fabric of life.